The dress felt heavier than Remedios remembered from the fitting. Or maybe it wasn't heavier. Maybe she was the one who felt lighter. Because when you lose something in a matter of minutes, something you've built over 8 years, your body feels strange. As if it were borrowed. As if it no longer knew exactly who it belonged to. The sacristy smelled of candles and white flowers. Those flowers she herself had chosen 3 weeks earlier, standing for 40 minutes in front of 2 buckets of gardenias, deciding which shade of white was just right for the most important day of her life. Outside, in the chapel, 83 people were waiting. She had counted them on the list. 83. Family, friends, co-workers, the school principal. Her mother's neighbor, whom she never liked, but whom her mom insisted on inviting because a wedding happens once, and peace with the neighbor is needed every day. 83 people waiting to see Remedios marry Luciano. And Luciano hadn't arrived. Not in the sense that he was late. In the sense that he sent a message. A message, folks. After 8 years. After 18 months of planning that wedding. After 4 dress fittings. After 83 handwritten invitations because Remedios insisted that handwritten invitations felt more real. A message. I'm sorry. I can't. Forgive me. 9 words. After 8 years. Remedios read the message 3 times. Not because she didn't understand it, but because the brain sometimes needs to read something 3 times to accept that it's real and not a joke in very, very bad taste. It wasn't a joke. She sat on the wooden bench with the white dress scattered around her like a fallen cloud, with the phone in her hand, with the organist, whom no one had warned, still playing inside, with 83 people on the other side of the door who still knew nothing. And it was there, in that silence of organ and gardenias, that Remedios made the one decision that would change everything. She didn't cry. She stood up. She shook out her dress and walked out the back door. And what seemed like the end of everything, my friends, turned out to be the beginning of the most unexpected story that town has ever told. If you believe that sometimes God slams a door shut because the window waiting for us is much better than we could ever imagine, leave me a like now. Subscribe to the Cuentos de Otros Tiempos channel. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single story. And tell me in the comments from which corner of the world you're listening to us. Let's get started. To understand why Remedios was in that sacristy with 83 people on the other side of the door, you have to understand 8 years. And 8 years can't be summed up in a few words. They're told in detail. Luciano arrived in town when Remedios was 26 and was already starting to hear the questions. The ones they ask women of a certain age in small towns. And when are you going to settle down? Don't you have a boyfriend yet? As if the absence of a man were a manufacturing defect. He was handsome, the kind who knows he is, and uses it in just the right dose, so you don't feel manipulated but are always right on the verge of being. He came to teach math at the high school and had that confidence of men who know how to speak well and who confuse speaking well with being right. The first 2 years were good. That has to be said. Luciano was one of those who talked a lot about the future. The house, the trips, the kids. 2, he always said. 2. The future sounded so beautiful coming from his mouth. The problem was that it was taking a while to arrive. Year 3. Remedios asked about getting engaged. Luciano said it wasn't the right time yet. Reasonable. Year 5. His mom was sick. Also reasonable. Year 6. His mom recovered. Remedios waited 3 months and asked again. Luciano said yes, and Remedios felt something she shouldn't have felt. Not joy, relief. Like when you've been waiting for something for so long that, when it finally arrives, the first thing you feel is that the weight of waiting is gone. Not the wait. The waiting. That should have told her something. The 18 months of preparations were the most active in the relationship. Now Remedios understands why. Because she was busy. And when she was busy, she didn't ask questions. And when she didn't ask questions, Luciano was happy. What matters now is that Remedios walked out the back door of that chapel and walked. She had nowhere to go. She just knew she had to move. Because if she stood still, she was going to cry. And if she cried in public, in that small town, that would be the only thing they'd remember about her. Not the teacher, not the woman. Just the one who cried in her wedding dress on the street. Not that. The farm appeared by accident. Or not by accident. Remedios doesn't believe in accidents, though she does believe that sometimes things that seem like accidents are God being creative without explaining the joke to us. 3 weeks after the wedding that never was, Remedios was still living in the same house, teaching at the same school, walking through the same town where 83 people looked at her with that mix of pity and curiosity that is the hardest thing to bear. Not the pain. The way others look at the pain. That Friday she went out for a walk with no particular destination after class. She took a path that wasn't the way home, and she found the sign. For sale. Small farm with house. Chickens included. Handwritten on cardboard with faded black marker. It wasn't the kind of sign you put up when you're in a hurry to sell. Remedios can't explain why she went inside. Years later, she'll say it was curiosity. But at that moment, the honest answer would have been, because no one is waiting for me anywhere else. The woman who came out to greet her was Doña Petra, 71 years old, thin as a broomstick, but with the energy of someone who hasn't wasted a single day. Dark eyes that stared with too much attention to be comfortable. Remedios explained that she had seen the sign, that she just wanted to know the price, that she had no experience with farms. Doña Petra listened without interrupting, and she named the price. It was low, very low, too low to make sense. Remedios asked why it was so cheap. Because the hens are old, and nobody wants them. Remedios looked toward the coop. 6 hens. Old, yes. You could tell by the way they walked, slowly, without the urgency of the young ones. Feathers a little ruffled. One of them had a leg that dragged as she walked, with that particular dignity of someone who has learned to move with what she has. They all looked at Remedios with that sovereign indifference that hens possess and that seems like universal judgment. How many eggs do they lay? Few, said Doña Petra, without apologizing. And what good are they, then? Doña Petra was silent for a moment. For the same thing that anything old that's still alive is good for. To carry on. Remedios bought the farm that afternoon. With the savings she'd set aside over 8 years for the future, that future Luciano described so well, and which turned out not to include her. The savings were just enough, neither too much nor too little, as if they'd been waiting for exactly that fate. Her mother cried when she found out. Not out of joy. Her friends said she was in shock, that in a few days she'd come to her senses. Remedios came to her senses, and she moved forward. On her first day at the farm, Remedios realized 3 things. 1. She knew nothing about chickens. 2. The chickens didn't seem to know anything about her either, nor did they have any interest in learning. 3. Doña Petra had left her a note with instructions that filled 5 pages of a notebook. At the end of the 5th page, in even smaller handwriting, it said, Don't yell at them. They have a memory. The farm smelled of damp earth, of straw, of something Remedios could only describe as a living animal with a history. It wasn't a bad smell. It was an honest smell. The kind that doesn't pretend to be anything else. The chickens had names: Esperanza, Consuelo, Perpetua, Dolores, Refugio, and the one with the dragging leg, Milagros. Women's names from another era. Names that carry weight, that bring with them generations of women who bore them before. Remedios read them aloud in front of the coop. The 6 hens looked at her. None of them did anything. "Good afternoon," said Remedios, feeling completely ridiculous. Esperanza turned around and showed her tail. And that's where it all began. The first few days were a comedy-style disaster. Dolores pecked her finger with a surgeon's precision. 4 days of bruising. Milagros settled down exactly where Remedios needed to work and wouldn't budge for anything in the world. Half an hour of negotiation. Milagros won. Refugio knocked over the water bowl twice that same day, staring at Remedios as she did it. At night, Remedios read Doña Petra's instruction booklet like someone studying for an exam she doesn't understand, but knows is important. The note about Milagros read, "She has arthritis in her right leg. She walks slowly but gets where she wants to go. Don't underestimate her." The note about Esperanza, "She's the boss. If Esperanza accepts something, the others accept it." The note about Consuelo simply said, "She distrusts everything but remembers everything. Give her time." Remedios read that last paragraph and had to close the notebook, because it seemed to her that Doña Petra hadn't been talking only about the hen. The first week produced a total of 4 eggs. 4. Among 6 hens. In 7 days. She did the math. At 4 eggs a week, the farm would break even sometime in the next century. She called Doña Petra. "Are they eating well?" the old woman asked. "I think so." "Are they stressed?" Remedios looked toward the coop where Esperanza was strutting with the authority of a queen in her kingdom. "They don't seem stressed." Silence. "Are you stressed? I'm the one who just got married, and didn't get married, and bought a farm with 6 old hens that won't listen to me. What do you think?" Chickens sense the state of their caretaker. If the one who cares for them is in crisis, they go into crisis. Give yourself some time. Remedios hung up the phone. She sat on the edge of the coop, and for the first time since the sacristy, she cried. Not out of sorrow, not out of shame, out of exhaustion. The kind that comes when you finally stop running and your body decides to collect everything it was owed. Esperanza walked over to where Remedios was. She stopped a meter away. She looked at her, and then she sat down, if chickens sit, which is debatable, close but not on top, with that discreet presence of someone who promises nothing but doesn't leave either. It wasn't a miracle. It was an old hen doing what old hens know how to do, but Remedios stopped crying. And that was enough for that afternoon. Weeks later, Don Aurelio, the local veterinarian, showed up in a pickup truck that had seen better days, with a worn leather briefcase and the expression of a man who has spent a lot of time looking at animals and who now finds it hard to look at people without analyzing them too. He examined Milagros with a patience that Remedios found almost moving after weeks of struggling alone. How many do they lay? 4 eggs a week. Between them all. Don Aurelio said nothing. I know it's not much, said Remedios. It's honest, replied Don Aurelio. Old animals lay few eggs, but they lay good ones. There's nothing dishonest about an egg from a hen that's already lived. "Do you have experience with farms?" he asked afterward, though it was obvious he knew the answer. "I have an instruction manual and a lot of determination," said Remedios. Don Aurelio looked at her for a moment. "I've seen worse foundations," he said, and he gave her his number. The hardest problem on the farm wasn't technical. It wasn't the broken fence, or the well pump, or the 4 eggs a week. It was what happened when Remedios went to town. A town where everyone knows everyone else's name. Where 83 people were present the day Luciano didn't show up. Where they looked at her with that mixture of pity and curiosity that is the hardest thing to bear. Not the pain. The way others looked at her pain. Remedios learned to reply, "Fine, thank you," with a firmness that left no room for follow-up questions. Inside, it was more complicated. It wasn't the pain of Luciano. That was healing faster than she'd expected. The pain of losing someone who was never what they seemed is different from the pain of losing someone real. What hurts isn't the absence. It's discovering that what you thought existed didn't exist. What wouldn't heal was the question. At what point did I stop being me to become the one who fit into his story? She didn't have an answer yet, but she was beginning to suspect it was during those 8 years when she waited, shrunk back, let things pass, and that the farm was the first place in a long time where no one asked her to fit into anything. The chickens knew nothing about Luciano. They only knew that at 6 o'clock someone would arrive with water and food. And that was enough. The person who embodied the town's opinion was Doña Carmelita, 68 years old, president of the Parents' Association for 12 years. A friend of Luciano's mother, she said this openly, as if it were a badge of honor. What she said at the store, after Mass, at the market, was that Remedios was making a fool of herself, that it was an overreaction that could have been handled with more dignity. With more dignity. Those 2 words reached Remedios one Friday, when her neighbor Consuelo repeated them to her over coffee. "And what's more dignified than getting up and doing something?" Remedios said. Consuelo didn't answer, but she looked at her in a way that Remedios interpreted as, "I don't have an answer for that, and that means you're right." What Remedios didn't know until later was that Doña Carmelita had once owned her own farm. She sold it when she got married because her husband said it wasn't proper, and she had regretted it exactly once a week ever since. When Remedios found out, she didn't feel anger. She felt something akin to understanding, without that obliging her to forgive just yet. The 6th week, Remedios found 8 eggs. Not 4, 8. She counted them twice. She went to the kitchen. She put them on the table. She looked at them for a moment. That in any other context would have been ridiculous, but in this context was completely reasonable. And she called Doña Petra. 8, she said. Doña Petra took a second. "This week?" "This week." Silence. "They're accepting it," said Doña Petra. Simple. Like the most natural thing in the world. Remedios hung up, and she allowed herself, alone, in that kitchen that was starting to smell like her as well as the farm, a small smile. Not one of triumph. Of something more intimate. Of someone who feels, for the first time in a long time, that she is exactly where she needs to be. The 8 eggs became 9 the following week, and 11 the week after that. It wasn't commercial production, but it was starting to be the production of something that was growing. Remedios took eggs to the market on Thursdays, and the townspeople who gossiped about her life in private bought them without comment, because the eggs from old hens raised with care have a yolk of that deep yellow that industrial farm eggs don't have, and no one can deny that, even if they wanted to. Milagros began waiting for her at the coop door every morning. not because she was particularly affectionate, but she waited for her. And there was something about that ritual. The old hen with the dragging leg waiting for the woman who hadn't exactly arrived where she'd hoped to be either, that Remedios decided not to overanalyze. Some things work better when you don't analyze them. It was a Wednesday when Remedios noticed that Dolores wasn't eating. Dolores, the biggest, the quietest, the one who had pecked her finger on the first day, was standing still in the corner, not asleep, still in that different way animals have when something isn't right. She called Don Aurelio. Don Aurelio arrived in 20 minutes. He examined her, and his face, already serious, grew even more serious. It could be Newcastle, or it could be something less serious. But if it's Newcastle... He didn't finish the sentence. Remedios finished it. If it's Newcastle, it's contagious. Quickly. That night Remedios didn't sleep. She checked the pen every hour. Esperanza was eating normally. Consuelo too. Perpetua too. Refugio too. Milagros was walking slowly, but eating. Only Dolores remained still. At 2 in the morning, Remedios sat on the floor of the coop. Cold, the smell of damp straw, the flashlight shining on Dolores, and thought of all the possible outcomes. If it was Newcastle disease and it spread, she'd lose all 6. Everything. The farm would survive physically, but without the chickens it was just a house in the countryside. The project would die. And then, in that early morning chill, surrounded by chickens sleeping without knowing their owner was calculating disasters, the thought came that shouldn't have come, but did. Maybe Doña Carmelita was right. Maybe this was an overreaction. Maybe a sensible woman would have taken 2 weeks off, would have cried as much as needed, would have returned to her orderly life. Maybe the farm was what everyone said, a whim born of pain. Esperanza moved. She walked from her corner without hurrying. Esperanza never hurried. She settled down less than half a meter away. She looked at her. "I don't know what I'm doing," Remedios told her in a low voice. In the cold of 2 in the morning, talking to a chicken. That was the level of total absurdity her life had reached. Esperanza didn't answer, of course, but she didn't leave either. And Remedios decided that sometimes the only answer one needs is for someone to stay. The next day, Don Aurelio arrived with the results. It wasn't Newcastle disease. It was a localized bacterial infection. Treatable, not contagious. Remedios listened, nodded, thanked him. When Don Aurelio left, she had to sit on the steps because her legs couldn't bear the relief and the fear and the exhaustion from the night before all at once. Milagros appeared by her side, a limp leg, disheveled feathers, eyes of a queen with arthritis. She settled down next to Remedios in silence. And Remedios, who hadn't cried in front of anyone in months, cried. Not out of sadness. Out of that relief that hurts. The kind that comes when you finally understand that you're more committed to something than you thought. That this project wasn't a whim, it was a decision. And that real decisions aren't made the day you make them. They're made the day you decide not to abandon them when they get tough. It took Dolores 2 weeks to recover. Don Aurelio came every 3 days. On the 4th visit, when Dolores was already walking at her normal pace, Don Aurelio said it wasn't necessary for him to keep coming. Remedios offered him coffee. Don Aurelio accepted. And in that kitchen, with the wood-burning stove that Remedios had already learned to use, with the scent of the countryside drifting in through the window, Don Aurelio spoke more than he had in all the previous months combined. He spoke of his wife, of the 3 years that had passed since she died, of how he had continued working as a veterinarian, not only because it was his job, but because he needed to remain of some use to something living. Remedios listened without interrupting, without offering easy comfort, letting the words take up the space they needed. When he finished, they fell silent. "Thank you for coming every time you did," said Remedios, "not just for Dolores." Don Aurelio nodded, a brief nod, and he left. Remedios was left thinking that sometimes the people who need help the most aren't the ones who seem the loneliest. The market the following Thursday was different. Remedios arrived with 3 dozen eggs and placed them on the table with the label Consuelo had helped her make. Eggs from free-range hens, raised with care. Doña Carmelita stopped by the stall. She stopped. She looked at the eggs. She looked at Remedios. And Remedios, who at another time in her life would have lowered her eyes, would have filled the silence with something conciliatory, did none of that. She looked at her, without a forced smile, without hostility. Just, here I am. This is what I do. And I don't need your approval to keep doing it. Doña Carmelita took a dozen eggs. She paid for them. And she left without saying a word. Which, for Doña Carmelita, was equivalent to a speech. It wasn't a victory. It was something calmer than a victory. It was simply carrying on. The symbol didn't come from where Remedios expected. Doña Petra called one Sunday morning. "How are they?" she asked, without specifying who. Remedios knew she was asking about the hens. "Fine. Dolores has recovered. Milagros is keeping up her pace. Esperanza is still in charge." "And you?" Pause. "Me too. I'm fine too." Brief silence. "I came to drop something off for you. It's in the mailbox." Remedios went to the mailbox. She found an envelope. Inside, an old photograph, black and white. A young woman standing in front of the same farm, decades earlier, with 6 chickens at her feet. And on the back, in Doña Petra's handwriting, "I also arrived here without knowing what I was doing. It took me 2 years to realize it was exactly the right thing. You're quicker than I was." Remedios sat on the steps with the photograph in her hand. Milagros appeared. Esperanza appeared. And little by little, without being summoned, the 6 old hens settled around her in that way they had of being present without asking for anything. Remedios looked at the photo. She looked at the farm. She looked at the 6 hens. And she understood something Doña Petra hadn't needed to write, that the old things the world discards aren't defective. They're simply from another time, and they are still capable of giving, of growing, of accompanying, for those who know how to see them. The hens, the farm, herself. The time that followed was not one of sudden, sweeping changes. It was one of things built slowly, which is the only honest way true things are built. The farm grew just enough. A bigger coop in the 2nd year. 3 new hens that the veterans accepted after 2 weeks of complicated protocol, because Esperanza had her standards and wouldn't budge on them. Preserves that Consuelo sold at her stall, and that brought in enough for Remedios to cut back on her hours at school. Don Aurelio started coming on Sundays, not for the chickens, for the coffee, and for Remedios, who listened in a way that felt necessary to him. This epilogue isn't a love story, folks, or not yet. It's the story of 2 people who learned that care is a form of love that doesn't need to be named before its time. Doña Carmelita returned to the market stall on Thursdays. She didn't always buy anything, but she stopped by. And once she told Remedios that eggs from a well-cared-for old hen are the best for making flan. Remedios thanked her for the tip, and she didn't add anything else. A year later, Remedios received a message from Luciano. Short. It explained something. It apologized for something. It asked for something. Luciano's messages always asked for something, even if they said otherwise. Remedios read it once, and deleted it, without anger, with the calmness of someone throwing away something that no longer serves a purpose. That afternoon, while feeding the chickens, she told Esperanza. Esperanza looked at her, and kept eating, which was exactly the right response. Much later, 2 years, 3, Remedios would sometimes sit on the steps at the end of the day, when the sun painted the countryside that color which has no exact name, but which anyone who has lived in the countryside recognizes. And she looked at what she had built. She didn't look at what was missing. She looked at what was there. And she thought, without telling anyone yet, that the best things in her life had come in through the back door. Not where good things are supposed to come in. Where you leave when you can no longer stay. And so this story ends, my friends. It's not about a woman who found the right man after the wrong one. It's about a woman who found herself in a pen with 6 old hens that nobody wanted, in a land that needed hands that knew how to wait, just far enough away from a town that judged her before understanding her, and who learned the way you only learn the important things, which is by doing them even if they hurt and even if they go wrong at first. That dignity isn't what you receive. It's what you build, with your hands, over time, with the decision to get up on a Tuesday at 6 in the morning, even though no one is watching, and feed 6 old hens that will look at her as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. Because sometimes the bravest thing isn't the grand gesture. It's the Tuesdays. If this story touched your heart, if there's something in Remedios that you recognized in yourself or in someone you love, leave me a like now. Subscribe to the Cuentos de Otros Tiempos channel. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single story. And tell me in the comments, what was the moment that touched you the most? Was it Remedios walking out the back door of the sacristy? Was it Esperanza sitting beside her in the corral at 2 in the morning? Or was it that old photograph in the mailbox with Doña Petra's handwriting on the back? I want to know what stayed in your heart. And always remember, sometimes you think you're losing everything, but what you're losing is only what wasn't yours to begin with. And what remains, what you've always been waiting for, begins right there. Until the next story. God bless.